Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and welcome to Chasing Legends. Welcome back to Chasing Legends. One more time, I'm your host, Wayne Tuttle. And please go down, hit the notification bell, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, go to our website, www.legends Superstition Mountains. You'll find all the info, links to everything we have on YouTube and everywhere else there, including the bark notes. We'll get into this week's episode here pretty quickly because it's one I kind of been thinking about talking about. There was several I wanted to do, and getting to the end of the year I kind of saved them because I thought they were real interesting. This one is a guy named Richard, and he came out, it was I think the second or third rendezvous. He'd been out and been kind of sitting around talking to some people, and he came over finally. I was camped usually down in the lower end of the camp at that point, and he came down and introduced himself. We're talking for a few minutes, and we're having a pretty busy time at the rendezvous that year. Saw a lot of people, and he said, you know, he had questions he wanted to ask some people, and I was like, well, you know, here's some people you could talk. He said, but nobody's listening. And one of the problems we had for a number of years at the rendezvous was stone map guys would all show up. And say you get 25 stone map guys, and they all have 25 different solutions. And none of them really will listen to the other guy, 24 guys. And because they're, you know, and they still do it to this day. But there was, I would say, in my point of view, an alarming number stone map guys with all their information and all their stuff, and they would gather, and sometimes it would kind of derail or detour everything from really just what we would call Dutch hunter talk. It was stone map guy talk, stoners talk, as Frank would put it. And this guy wasn't really into the, you know, stone maps. Now, when he first started explaining things, I thought that's what he was into. I really thought that was the direction it was going to go. And then I was surprised to find out he had zero interest in all that, which was one reason they ignored him. But yeah, he was in a completely different kind of thing, and he had a lot of good questions. So he started asking me questions. He said, have you ever seen stuff carved out in the mountains? And I said, yeah. And at that time I knew less than I know now. But I told him, yeah, but my particular feeling, it was always hard to tell how old something was because things weather differently. There's been so much stuff that's been put into the mountains, added to other things, on cactuses, rocks, that it's hard to say how old something really is. And it's funny because everyone becomes a forensic geologist out there. Oh, that one's really old. And I've always been like, I'm not sure, you know. It depends how they made it and everything else, and how the weathering goes and this and that, and what the way it's exposed to the weather. So he said he'd been finding these crosses carved into these rocks. And I was like, huh. And so I'm thinking stone map stuff some reason. I mean, we're talking, and I'm like, I'm not too sure about, you know, have ever seen anything quite like that. And we talked, and I told him there's the rocks. I knew there was the 3-4 places where it says Peralta. And we talked about the master map area going out to Charlie Boy, a lot of the petroglyphs, they're up on Blacktop, and some other areas. And I told him there's a difference sometimes you can find from the petroglyphs to the Dutch hunters. And I know there's some crosses, but I know in the case of several, they were made by actual people that admitted to making them. And funny story with Clay Wurst about one that actually becomes a funnier story because of someone else kind of stepping into his story and creating their own version of his story. And it is actually hilarious. I think I got some of it actually on video somewhere. It'd be funny to kind of go through that whole thing someday. I'll have to remember that. But anyways, he's talking. He says, no, there are these crosses. And they're about 5. This first one I found is like 5-6 inches. And you can tell it's 3-4 inches across for the horizontal piece. He says it looks like someone carved a cross. And I said, huh. And he says, I found a couple of them. And the first one he found was out, and he wouldn't tell me exactly area. He said it's out in Barkley Basin area going to, Spanish graveyard. I was like, okay. And I would ask, kind of where at, is it out at Spanish graveyard on a rock somewhere there? Because there've been a lot of people and that whole thing. And I could see someone faking something there. And he's like, no. And he'd say it was on a spot where you would he said he felt like it was in an odd place where you would stand and then be looking out. And he thought it had some significance. He wasn't sure. He said he found the other one up somewhere, I think around Whiskey Springs or somewhere. And he talked about them both. And he said he wasn't sure what to make of them. He said they were about the same size. He said the second one that he found had a dot. It was in an upper left-hand spot in between, the crosses, it was in the upper spot. So he said he wasn't sure what the dot was. The other one he had pictures, so I looked at the pictures. I couldn't, you're not seeing anything to scale. I'm trying to look at it to scale what he's saying. I'm thinking, man, that's a needle in a haystack find. And he said, yeah. He said he just kind of found the first one and the second one. But he had an idea of something, and he wanted to know if anybody had used that sort of thing as a way marker, and anybody had seen kind of the symbol and the dots. And I said, no, I don't really. I said, you'd have to talk to someone else. And I tried to point him in the direction of someone, but he gave me kind of a rundown of the general thing of what he was looking for. And he said, well, he was going to be out. And I was, good for you, Richard. Didn't think much of it. The next year he comes to the rendezvous, and came over and he saw me and he talked to me. And it was kind of similar because we had a number of runny years, everybody's stone map. And I think he tried to talk to a couple people, and they weren't listening to him. Because again, they thought he was telling them his stone map theory. He was just talking about these crosses he was finding and wanted to know significance. So he showed me he'd found some others. He said he found one, but the dot was in a different place. And he'd found one out by Miner's Needle. And then there was another one up by Trap Canyon. And he was giving me kind of general stuff, but more than he did before. And he said for what he was noticing as he got further where the crosses were, the one thing he said that was happening was the crosses were getting a little bigger. He said, I measured them. And he said, by the fourth or fifth one I found, it was slightly bigger. But then the next one, he said it was a little larger. And he says, I don't know if that means I'm getting closer or something, whatever. He said the other thing was the crosses would tilt. And that's when I was saying, you sure they're not X's? He said, because like the stone maps has X's and stuff. He's like, no. He says, no, forget about all that stuff. And he said, and I have no idea to this day because I've been through tons of stuff. He said he found something and he felt like it worked with that. And he says, it's not stone maps or anything like that. But it seemed to work in line with that. Now, he said his thing was either these are really old and they had some sort of points, so you would work your latitude, longitude to point. Now people get confused always thinking GPS. Latitude, longitude, and those type of calculations, and whether you use a compass or the celestial, the heavens, whatever you do, that stuff's been around since like the 3rd century. So he felt like they were directional, and the leaning of the cross was something to do with the directional or degrees. And he felt the dots had to do with the cross, and then the dots had to do with something too. Either this is step 1, 2, 3, or what it was. And he showed me, and I didn't get to copy all the stuff. He had papers, and he wrote down his Latin long and his directional, and he had his degrees, and he had everything. And he said, I don't think they're survey, but he says it's almost like that, but it goes zigzagging around. And I was kind of interested because it was interesting to find several. And He said his other possibility he thought of was that this was someone that was tracking something, and they were making these marks as they went, so they would always have them to reference as they were doing this. So they were finding something and marking this as they got closer to whatever they were getting close to. And he said the last one he found was almost about 10 or 12 inches high, and the cross member was probably 6 inches. And he said it was significantly larger than the others. And he said he'd found that, and it was more up through the barge. He said, I don't know where it's taking me, because it is kind of a roundabout. There's no true, just normal direction. It seems to move. And he says, I don't know he says, I don't have any illusion that this is treasure or lost mines. I don't know what it is. And I found it intriguing. This time, he actually allowed me to take one of the topo maps, because we always take topo maps of the rendezvous. And we sat down, and he showed me where several were. He said, the one thing I'm going to tell you, and if you find some of these, we'll talk about it, because he says, I'm sure there's others out there. He said a couple of them no longer are there. He says one was already gone. He says the rock was broken up around it. He says someone had taken a rock pick or a hammer and bashed up the rock. So he felt like there would have been one there, but then he came, a bunch of the rock had been destroyed the surface. So he thought, well, someone wanted to erase this. He said there was one he'd found, and when he went back through, because he said each time I do it, I kind of follow the path to see if there's one sometimes I've missed in between, something I'm kind of missing. He says, I don't know what the symbols mean. I don't know if I'm missing. So he said he follows the path. Well, one of them, someone had destroyed again. So he said there's maybe someone else out there who's kind of run into them and is plotting them, but they're knocking and breaking the stuff out as they go. So he says, I don't know how much longer. So he said, here's a number of them. You can go out and see what you can figure out. So I don't know how many he'd found, 7, 8, 9, 10, but he gave me 3 or 4. And so I went out to look for them, and I couldn't find nothing. I think I had one near Brush Corral, in Brush Corral Basin. And then there was one he had somewhere near Miner's Needle. They're both off the trail. And I looked at both, and I couldn't find them. Finally, I went up, and I found the one up at Trap Canyon on the next trip I made. And it was there, and it had a dot, and I looked at it. And then I tried in my head figure, okay, so this goes to here, this goes to here, and what he'd been talking about. Said, I'm going to track back, and maybe now that I found one, I can kind of figure out kind of his talking, even though I knew the general area. So I did find another one, and sure enough, there was another cross, and I was like, okay, this guy could be playing me and doing this, but it is intriguing. I mean, I don't know what it means. And I was looking at it, so I spent some time going through a bunch of different Dutch hunters' stuff, and I even talked to Tom Collenborn about it. He said everybody carves stuff in there. He says he wouldn't think much of it. But I was trying to find, would there be anybody or anything anyone knew of that was a map that would just be set some sort of survey or latitude, longitudes, or something in code where it's in letters for numbers or something that was written in such a way, because this guy was figuring stuff out, and that was the one thing he gave away. He said when he found and kind of figured it out, he realized, oh, this kind of goes with this. And he said, then I found some of the coordinates were in there, but it was very difficult, and I would have never really done that. But he said he'd been going into it, so he must have been at Greg's, but I don't know. And so it kind of went that, well, I went out one last time, and I just wanted to go out and kind of figure if I could find one of them, and I found one of the spots he said had been busted up. And I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting, because it fits with his story again. And I still don't know what I'm looking for. I would look in the area around there to see if there was anything else, any petroglyphs, any kind of markings, any sign that someone had, are they for claims? Because I know sometimes people would use something, maybe do something like that for a mining claim. And there was no reason, nothing I could find researching old claims. But this one had been busted up, and I thought, it could just be someone busted a piece of rock or the rock naturally broke. And down on the ground was all these pieces, and I picked one up, and you could see where the cross, the member of the cross, had been. So one of the pieces still had a bit of it on it, and it was carved in like the same depth. And I realized, okay, he was right. Someone has been through and busted these up. I didn't know where to go after Trap Canyon because he didn't give me where he had gone and what the next ones were. I never was able to read up or research any type of solution. But if anyone's out there, and I know someone recently found one, but they didn't tell where it was, and I don't think it was the same thing because it looked much smaller. But they were crosses, and they started out, and he said they got larger, and depending on the direction we would go, they would also tilt. So if you're the one, say, in Trap Canyon and you needed to head over to Home Springs, it would kind of tilt that you're going to go left and kind of fade to the left. And the dots, one of his thoughts is the first ones he found didn't have anything, but then they had the dots going in a pattern of left to right, clockwise. And he felt as you were going, that was kind of a number system as you'd go through. And then the next cross would get bigger, and then it would do the dots around again to let you know what sequence you're in. And that was just one of his theories, which was very interesting. Never saw Richard again. Had no information on him. Wish I kind of would have got to meet him one more time after I'd seen it. Because I would have liked to kind of, he would have given me something to know where his source, what the material was. I don't know if he ever went to Greg's and researched or somewhere else or other source. And it could have been purely in his head. And he just kept getting lucky. But it was intriguing to me. But there was nothing I had other than seeing a few sites. I never found anything else on those paths as much as I looked and tried. And the fact that someone could have destroyed some of them made it to me as like it's needle in the haystack. So I knew the places he supposedly found them. There's one supposedly up near Home Spring, and there's another one up near Charlie Boy, on the way to Charlie Boy. And there was supposedly another in Marsh Valley. But I don't have any general idea or anything specific to go on other than it's somewhere, because he would talk in those general areas. And when he first talked to me, when he spoke in the general areas, they were very general, because when he told me specifically where a couple were to go look at, I was like, man, I would have never figured that out. I had a hard time finding the first one, because when I finally found it, I was like, pff. And he must have been purely lucky, because I feel like almost I was lucky finding it when I found the first one, because I just happened to look over and realize, man, I wouldn't have caught that in a million years. But I was really focused looking for it and was frustrated. And then I just happened to see it and realize, oh, I finally seen one. So there you go. So if you're ever in the mountains and you see the crosses, you see a dot on one of them on one of the sides, you might have found one of those. I don't know how to tell you to find the next one, but there is supposedly the Barkley Basin, one I'm getting over by Spanish Graveyard, coming up around through Miner's Needle, one out by, I said Whiskey Springs, the trailhead there, and there's supposedly another up by Trap Canyon, and then another going Home Spring, and that's all I basically know. I know he said there was one going out towards the Charlie Boy. I don't know anything more specific than that. And then he said the trail seemed to be taking him out towards Marsh Valley. So I would take it, there's another spring northeast of Charlie Boy going along out that way along the trail. And I wonder if it was near there, but I never got much information out of him. I think he was being secretive because he thought there was something there, and he was very worried about who was destroying those symbols. Don't know who it was. I think everybody at the rendezvous was a bit sorry. Well, they're not. Now they might be a bit sorry. At the time, I don't think they had any idea. This guy was really trying to tell everyone some other important information, as something he was finding in the mountains, but they were so hung up on the stone maps. They wouldn't hear him, and they just kept going stone maps, and whatever his solution was, whatever he had that was helping him to figure this out, had nothing to do with it, and he was telling them, no, listen to me, and they wouldn't. So He just happened to wander down, find little old me sitting there smoking a cigarette, and found someone willing to listen for once. So there you go. Don't know where Richard is. Maybe he watches this. Maybe he shoots us a comment. Maybe I get in touch with him and he tells me, hey, I found it, or I figured out the end, or yeah, it was nothing. But that would actually be cool, because once in a while, you get the end of the story, which would be nice. So there you go. That's the story of Richard and the crosses and the superstitions. Not the bilberry crosses or some other stuff, but it's very interesting. It's the only time I've really ever heard someone tell a story that kind of like was a whole fresh new take on everything. But I wish I knew to this day what it was that he found that he thought had to do with these crosses, because I have no idea. I've never found anything remotely in anybody's stuff that makes me believe that he was into that. So I don't really know. So there you go. I hope everybody's enjoying the holidays. I hope they have a great week. We're winding down, getting near Christmas. Next couple of Chasing Legends is stuff I've saved up, so we have some really good stories and stuff. And I will be getting to one everybody's wanted to hear about for so long. And I'm going to talk a bit. Maybe we'll do a two-parter on it, but I don't think we'll need that much time on it. But I'll be able to give and express kind of my opinions that people have heard privately, or they've heard me speak out of it at the rendezvous and in other times. But I'll talk about it, and kind of like, so everybody kind of hears the other side of that story, and so they can make the determination themselves. Hopefully that gets you hooked to watch that episode. But until then, remember, there's one important thing here. Most important thing wasn't the crosses or Richard, where he found them, and all the directions I've given you. And maybe I'll find those pieces of paper I drew that stuff on that he told me about. No, the most important thing to remember is, I'm Wayne Tuttle. You're not. And this was Chasing Legends.